dive into the world of information architecture. My name is Basile, and I'm a user interface designer, a full stack engineer, and for lack of a better term, a user experience practitioner. I've worked for a variety of companies and startups, and along the way, I've had the chance to explore, design, implement, and refactor many information architectures. And today, I'm excited to share the lessons I've learned with you. So you may not be aware of this, but we actually use information architectures all the time in our everyday lives. Every time we seek to organize sets of information into clear logical groupings, we're intuitively employing information architecture. Some examples that jump out are libraries using the Dewey Decimal System to catalog all of their books so we can find them quickly. Or if you're familiar with accounting, then you know that accountants use double entry bookkeeping to make sense and keep track of all the transactions at a company. And even in our daily lives, we can all relate to using addresses and maps to keep track of how to get to places. And we may not have realized it, but we're already pretty proficient at using systems to logically group and organize information. It's one of our core human skills. So what is IA? Now that we're a little more familiar with the idea of information architecture, what exactly is it? Well, our friends over at usability.gov define it as this. So information architecture, or IA, as it's commonly referred to, focuses on organizing, structuring, and labeling content in an effective and sustainable way. And the goal is to help users find information and complete tasks. So while we intuitively grasp how to organize, structure, and label content for ourselves, as UX practitioners, our frame of reference shifts, like it always does, to our users. So we use information architecture to ensure that our project structure, content, and hierarchy are optimized for our users' goals. And in doing so, we're developing the foundation for the rest of our user experience. And as we'll see in a few examples, this has tremendous implications for the projects we work on. So how does this work in practice? Let's take a look at some websites and compare how they approach their information architecture. Now, our first comparison comes from the study abroad industry. And we'll see two competitors have designed their information architectures and what that means for their overall user experience. So first up, we have International Studies Abroad's website. And this is a screenshot of what you see on their website before you scroll the page or do anything. And at first glance, it's pretty overwhelming. There are many links and buttons and no real established hierarchy for where to go first. And so once we get over our initial shock, it's tempting to immediately label this as a bad information architecture. However, in practice, this website actually works quite well for its users. For full disclosure, I used to work for ISA, so I'm familiar with the strategy they're pursuing with their information architecture. And for ISA, they're primarily concerned with findability, or in other words, the ease with which information can be found by users on their website. And with this strategy, they try to make every piece of their website immediately accessible via their homepage. And as a younger UX practitioner, I didn't really buy this approach, but what I went out and did was I talked to the students, parents, and school officials who were using the site. And so in that research, it turns out that once they had found the link to where they wanted to go, they loved the site because it was easy to revisit content they had seen in the past. So their first experience was overwhelming as they tried to get their bearings, but once they had the site figured out, it was easy for them to find what they were looking for. Now on the other end of the spectrum, we have ISA's competitor, Education First. And looking at their homepage, things look a bit cleaner. There are clear calls to action, and it's obvious that some content is more important than others. To do this, Education First has taken the time to prioritize the content they show their users. Hopefully, they did some user research to validate that they were prioritizing the right content, but nonetheless, their information architecture reflects their prioritization. Now, if we take a look at the website side by side, the differences become much more apparent. But they reveal the fundamental tension in information architectures between findability and prioritization. And typically, our information architectures lie somewhere on the spectrum. And it's up to us to determine which one we want to optimize for. So let's take a look at a more famous example of this tension in action by looking at Yahoo and Google. So as we see, the websites couldn't be more different. We have Yahoo focused on findability, while Google has prioritized their search bar. And again, these differences stem from two radically different strategies. While they're both search engines, Yahoo is trying to be your gateway to the internet, lots of extra content. And Google only cares about getting you to search as quickly as possible. Now, both of these companies have been enormously successful in pursuing completely different strategies with their information architectures. So it doesn't matter which side of the spectrum your own information architecture swing, as long as they match your user's needs. So as we've seen, your information architecture really has a tremendous impact on how you organize your interface and your overall user experience. And by spending the time to think through and research what an effective information architecture looks like for your users and project, you lay a really strong foundation for your future user experience efforts. Now that we've seen some information architectures at work, let's see what it takes to build our own from scratch. So let's pretend we all work for a travel agency and we need to build our first website. So to get started, we'll need to understand what our company goals are for the website and what our user goals are. Now, company goals usually differ from user goals. For example, for this site, the company would like every user to sign up for our most expensive trip, but users are typically looking for a good value or a specific location. So once again, we have another tension. And if we build our information architecture to suit the company's goals, then we probably won't have tons of happy customers using our site. But if we swing all the way over to users' needs, then we might not make any money. Again, managing this tension is what we're here to do. So with this in mind, our first step is to do some research to find out what our company's and our users' goals are. Now, this could be a whole separate course on its own, so we won't deep dive and spend too much time discussing it here. But as a general overview for a company, this typically means getting all the relevant stakeholders together to discuss how the website fits into the company's vision and identifying what it needs to achieve in order to be successful. So once you've done that, you can interview users and get a sense of what they're looking for from your website. And after you've interviewed your users and met with your team, you can start to look for patterns in their responses and try to consolidate them into a list of goals. So let's do that now for our travel company. So for example, our company goals might look like having users discover our trips and signing up for them. And if they create an account along the way, that's great. Meanwhile, our users' goals might be to just find some cheap trips, or they want to go to a specific location, or maybe they've got two in mind and they're trying to find a deal and figure out where they want to go. And so with these goals mapped out for our company and users, we can then combine the list and prioritize the goals based on that overlap. So goals that overlap should take a higher priority than goals that don't. And if we put all that together, then our website goals might look something like this. So we're going to let users discover the trips via the location and price, and then compare those trips, and then hopefully they're going to sign up for them. And if they create an account along the way, that'd be fantastic. So now that we have these goals, we can really build our information architecture around that. And there are a couple of ways to do this, but we're going to focus on one technique called card sorting. Now, card sorting is an exercise that helps us understand how to organize offerings so users know what you have and how to find it. In practice, this means getting a bunch of index cards or post-it notes and writing out all of the features or pages of your website, and then having users group the cards as they see fit. So this technique helps us understand our users' point of view and how they would expect our website to be organized. So let's list out our travel company's potential features and see how we can organize them with card sorting. So if we come up with a sort of generic features list based on our goals, we're probably going to have a trip gallery, some sort of search function, a specific page for trip details, some sort of comparison tool, and then those user accounts. And that's going to look something like that. And ideally, we'd actually get an index card or post-it note and individually write out each of these features on all those cards. And we'd give those cards to a bunch of users and have them organize them into groups. For this example, I had my wife do it for us, and this is what she came up with. So on the left here, we've got our trip cards, and we've got trip gallery, search, details, and comparisons. And then we have user cards, which are just the accounts. And that makes pretty good sense, right? But it's important to remember that card sorting is a tool to inform our information architecture. So our IA doesn't need to be an exact match to our card sorting results. Instead, since we have the full picture of the project, we should be comfortable overruling these results when it makes sense. So for an example here, we might move trip details and trip comparisons into their own category because they focus more on specific trips rather than all the trips. But now that we have our card sorting results, we're ready to start laying out our sitemap. So while card sorting helps us organize our features into distinct groups, our sitemap lets us connect the dots and describe the relationships between our features. Now, there are many tools out there for building sitemaps. Some of them are visual and some of them are more text-based. But I found that Excel or another spreadsheet software works really well for this. So there's no one way to organize your sitemap, but I found that this approach works well for any project. So at the beginning here, each page belongs to its own level, and the pages that link to other pages are higher than the linked pages. Then there's a column for notes where we can describe the page's purpose, And finally, there's the path column where we can keep track of the page's URL. And so that's kind of complex and abstract, but if we take a look at what our travel site may look like, we have the home page at level 1, and then at level 2, the search, the details, and the comparisons, some notes describing all those pages, and then potential paths that they could have in our sitemap. So as you can see, this doesn't precisely correlate to our card sorting, and it's our job as UX practitioners to use our best judgment to match the features to relevant pages and organize them into a cohesive information architecture. But that doesn't mean we're always spot on. So for our last step in building an information architecture, we need to user test it to ensure its viability. So user testing is, again, a huge topic that we would take a few lessons to cover, but we'll keep things simple. So to test your information architecture, we'll look back to our website's goals and turn them into user tasks that can be completed using our new sitemap. So we've got our goals up top and then some potential tasks down below. And the thing to remember with user tasks is we're trying to make them as actionable and as relevant as possible. So anytime we can use real content in our user task is a big win for us. So for example, for the first one, having users discover trips via their location and price, that task might look like, where would you look to find the cheapest trip to Brazil? You can kind of continue to go through all the goals and write up those tasks in that fashion. So now that we have some tasks to prompt our users, we need to build a prototype for them to interact with. And the prototype can be any level of fidelity you want. But the fastest prototype I've seen is to create an index card for each level in your sitemap, and then add its sub-levels to the bottom of the card. So it might end up looking something like this. Then for each test, we'll present the user with the homepage card first, and ask them to complete the task by pointing to the links they'd like to follow. So as they click links, you can swap out the card the user is viewing with the one they clicked. So in this fashion, we can rapidly confirm that users can complete their core tasks using our information architecture. If they had a hard time completing tasks, then we know that we'll need to revisit our sitemap and either adjust the paths or change how we're labeling the information. But if you're getting around 90% of your tests successful, then you can be pretty confident that you have a usable information architecture. And there you have it. We've kind of followed this process to research and align ourselves with our team and our users, map their point of view to our site, and then tested that we didn't miss the mark to put together a solid information architecture for our travel company's website. Now, sometimes when we're starting a new information architecture, it can feel super overwhelming to get started, especially for big projects. In those cases, I've had great success overcoming that mental block by focusing on the research. As we learn more about the goals and problems facing our users and team, it becomes much easier to visualize how the site could come together, and you can build some momentum from there. Chances are that for your first few information architecture projects, you won't be building a new one from scratch. Instead, you'll be tasked with improving an existing one. So don't worry, though, about having to learn a whole new process. Improving an existing one is almost identical to building one from scratch. However, we'll add one new step at the beginning, and that is a content or a sitemap audit. So in order to build a better information architecture, we need to understand where we're coming from originally. So to do that, we can use the same spreadsheet template from our blank sitemap to document what the current sitemap looks like. So we can start with the landing page and then work our way through all the links and sublinks to map out their relationships. Having this documented at the beginning gives us a basis for comparison as we develop the new information architecture. And this helps us avoid some of the problems with the original one and maybe spark a few new ideas. Another huge major benefit that is probably unnoticed a lot of times is that your pages are now numbered. When we did the content audit for the ISA website, there was a whole bunch of links and pages in that site, but our team was always able to know what site page we were talking about and having a discussion because everything was numbered now. And as you can imagine, with a huge site like that, that's tremendously helpful to any team and organization. So once you've completed the audit, then you can kind of roll into the rest of the process we just covered. However, in the research phase, your company may have already researched its own goals and its user goals. So in that case, you may be a step ahead of the game. But I would recommend that you take some time validating that those goals are still relevant. Goals can change over time, and you might find that having a different set of them will dramatically influence the IA you develop. And then one final word of advice be careful out there. So be careful when you're updating existing information architectures. We're all creatures of habit, and we're resistant to dramatic changes. So completely changing an existing information architecture would be just like if everyone changed their address and then physically moved their house on the same day. We know where we want to go, we just wouldn't have any idea how to get there. And you've probably experienced this yourself when a website rebrands or introduces an updated interface. It's always frustrating to get your bearings again. So be careful when refactoring existing information architectures and consider rolling out your changes in an incremental way instead of all at once. So to bring this all together, we've learned that information architecture focuses on organizing, structuring, and labeling content in an effective and sustainable way. It's critically important for us to get right because it lays the foundation for the rest of our user experience. We can build our own information architectures by listening to our team and users, mapping their point of view to our features, and then making sure we got it right via testing. With this new knowledge, I encourage you to pay attention to the websites you visit. Notice how they're organized and present themselves to you. Does it match what you'd expect, or is there room for improvement? As you recognize more examples, building an information architecture should get easier and easier, and you'll be a pro in no time. Well, thank you so much for your attention. And I guess at this point, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Hey, Nick, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks a lot. That was awesome, by the way. Really just way to put it all together. Could you talk a little bit about that part where user testing and I think you were just showing them cards and not actual like mock-ups or anything. It seemed like a super lo-fi, really quick turnaround. And also, if that's correct, how do we resist the urge as developers to like kind of make it slightly more, oh, you know, you'll get it if I just throw the nav bar in there or something? Like, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So that's kind of a technique that I've come across kind of through trial and error. And again, facing those same challenges, how do we test something that's so basic as an information architecture without spending all the time doing the wireframes or building a prototype? And that's kind of a tool that we came up with. So in practice, exactly as we discussed, you would take that kind of sitemap and put the page in bold there, and then all the little links on the bottom. And then it's really as simple as getting somebody in front of it and saying, okay, can you find how would you find the cheapest flight in Brazil? Pretend this is a website. You kind of have to build up their mental model and their understanding of the exercise a little bit more than you would if you put them in front of a wireframe or a mock-up. But if you do that, and then you kind of sit back, and again, that's the hard part of user testing. You're trying not to say anything because you know all the answers. And that just comes down to kind of your own interaction with the subject. But making sure that you really let them kind of be the guide and point out, okay, I think we're going to have to go this way. And even if they're going down the wrong path, that's interesting because in their mind, they've associated that word with what you're trying to accomplish. So now you're getting a whole bunch of information about your labeling, what words you're choosing to represent different items or activities or features in your own project. And there's just so much information you can kind of glean from those quick, rapid tests. So when I'm developing an information architecture, you could kind of do that test with 5 to 10 people very rapidly and maybe do 2 or 3 iterations, all before you've even thought about kind of doing the wireframes or doing the mock-ups for the site. And you kind of have that immediate feedback. And I think that's the real value there for that exercise. Did that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, totally. Right on. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no problem. And if y'all have just general UX questions or stuff kind of parallel or related to information architecture, happy to kind of jump in there and help you out as well.
Do you know of an effective way to gauge like information architecture or client testing without a user base?
So that's a trick. You need fundamentally, I think that comes down to you really need to go out and do the research and try and find users. And I know that's really hard in a lot of cases. So right now I'm working with a startup, and we've had great success going into Starbucks and saying, we'll buy your coffee for you if you'll do a user test for us. You got to be really guerrilla about it. We've had good success actually going to Reddit and finding people in subreddits and communities where we would expect our target users to be interacting. And so there's so many different ways to go out and find users today that the notion that we can't find them or that they don't exist or they're not there, I don't know. I don't think it really exists. So that's kind of my mentality to it. But yeah, I think it is hard, and especially like, for example, if you're in an organization that doesn't want to support user testing. I've been in that environment as well. And so then it's really hard because most of the time marketing or sales has access to the customers or users that you would like to go out and talk to. And they're kind of holding the keys and not letting you go out and talk to them directly. And so in those situations, I encourage you to get creative and try and find them on your own through your own channels. Don't do anything that would get you in trouble at your company. I've kind of heard some stories about that as well. But yeah, I think there's so many ways to reach out to users these days. It's just a matter of kind of putting in the time, because it takes time, it takes effort. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, but it is always possible, I've found.
So Nick, someone posted in the group chat, have you played with Framer X?
I have not played with Framer X. Is that like a wireframing tool, or maybe a sitemapper?
Alan, hi. Do you have any additional questions about that?
Ah, nice. Gotcha. I haven't played with it. I'm mostly a Vue.js guy, so unfortunately, I haven't played with React too much either. So that's probably out of my league at this point.
I have a quick question. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to go into UX, just coming out of Lambda school? I mean, we've learned web development. I just don't know how to like frame myself as somebody who would do like user experience or user interface work.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I think the exciting thing about the field of UX is it's still pretty new and up and coming. And a lot of companies that are hiring for it right now themselves don't really have a good understanding of what they need out of a UX professional. And so it's really anyone's game at this point. You can kind of show up and say, I have the skills and this is what I'm looking for. And you can jump in. Some real actionable advice though is, so I didn't know UX either. I'm mostly self-taught myself. So I've got a whole big bookshelf there full of books. And so I spent a lot of time in my personal journey reading books, reading as much information, looking through as many blogs. And when I started, there weren't as many resources. Usability.gov now has a ton of information on user experience. UX Booth is another great website. They've got a lot of case studies. I know Smashing Magazine has done a lot. And A List Apart, they have really great blog content, as well as they do a book apart. And they've got a whole shelf of those books, and those are fantastic. So the amount of information out there to get yourself up to that level is freely available, or not freely, you got to buy the books, but the blog stuff is freely available. And so through a combination of that and then practicing on your own work, always looking at your designs or your interfaces and saying, how do I improve the UX of this? Can I get 3 or 4 users to look at this and run some user tests on it? And can I continue to improve my own work? And if you can demonstrate that ability, and that at least that you have you can logically guide someone through a project that you've worked on and said, this was at the beginning, and this is how I improved it through these UX techniques, I think most people would be pretty blown away by that and excited to have you on the team.
Okay, so like even maybe taking the time to look at a website and making my mock-up like fixes or changes and like displaying that, would that be like ideal or something like that?
Yeah, I think that would be great, and I think that really shows off your UI designer skills. I think if you kind of said, okay, I did a user study with 5 users on your website, and this is the results that I got back from them, and this is how. So Steve Krug actually has like Rocket Surgery Made Easy, and that's a fantastic book on conducting user tests. It's kind of the Bible for user testing. So if you follow that framework, and I think he's got a few blog posts too that kind of let you get in there for free. Okay. He's got a really good framework for how do you test an interface with people. And if you brought that information, like I know for myself, if somebody brought that to me to like a hiring meeting, I would be really excited and kind of blown away, because I don't think a lot of people take that initiative or put that effort into it. Right. So I think it's more than just designing the interface. It's showing the research and the user experience thought that went into that new design.
Okay. Can you say that book name again? The resource
Mhm.
that you just named, the last one?
Yeah. So Steve Krug. So it's Steve, and then I think it's Krug, or there might be
Yeah.
two G's.
Yeah.
Um, mhm. And then I think it's Rocket Surgery Made Easy. Yeah, it's in the Christian's got it for us in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thanks so much.
Mhm. No problem. Thank you.
What are your opinions or views on Vue?
I'm a big Vue.js fan. I use it primarily for my JavaScript front-end framework of choice. I played with React. I played with Angular. I've dabbled, but Vue I really like for its developer experience and easy use. And I know that's a little off topic for a UX chat, but that's definitely my 2 cents at least. Let's see here. I think here are some strategies or effective methods for getting users for UX testing. Yeah, like I said, going to Starbucks and getting people coffee can get expensive. But so is getting your product wrong to begin with. And I think that's generally more expensive than the $100 or $200, or you could do it with 10, you could do it with 2 people, dollars it takes to actually get out there and validate that this is something that's easily usable for people. So it just comes down to how you frame that expense, I guess. But some other techniques and methods I've done, depends on the project, and it also depends on the user you're looking for. I've had really good success with social media for projects and products that kind of target younger folks closer to my age. I'm also fortunate. I've got 2 younger brothers, and one of them's still in college. So all of their friends are always excited to talk to me and help out, and really reaching out to people kind of one-to-one and saying like, hey, you're someone who kind of fits the mold for what I'm looking for. Would you be interested in this? And so that I found to be really successful. Fintech specifically, that's a hard field, and I sympathize with that. I've had, again, good success kind of looking for influencers in that community, going to people who write blog posts on finance, or who are influencers in some way or another, and going directly to them and saying like, hi, I'm interested in doing some user study on your readers. Would you be willing to help me? And sometimes get shut down and they'll say no, but that's all part of the game. And if you can get out there and keep asking people, eventually over time, 1 or 2 of those folks might say yes. And then you can use that social proof, that validation, to then go reach back out to the next to the people who rejected you and said, these guys helped me. Would you mind helping too? And that kind of builds the snowballs in and of itself. So I've had success doing it that way.
What do you think about the relationship between UX and brand design? Should you do your user experience studies even before you come up with a brand, or?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Yes, you should do your user experience tests before you have a brand. That said, color, font, typography, all has an impact on how we perceive interfaces. And so it should be a consistent iteration, right? So I highly recommend testing as early and often as possible. And as you're developing brand features, like, a lot of people don't think to user test their brands. They kind of pick a font and they pick a logo, and then they kind of say, oh, okay, that's what's good for us. That works for me. But at the end of the day, they don't go out and then show that to users and say, well, how does this make you guys feel? Or no one's really doing that sort of testing. So I think having like 3 or 4 different brands that you come up with and then running those through user tests and seeing how that influences your responses is also really helpful. For example, if you chose a color palette, that could have a really significant impact on your conversion rates one way or another. So incorporating that into your user testing, I think, is a critical step, and it's a misstep most of the time. But I definitely think you can user test without branding, you can user test with branding, and you're generally better off if you're doing both.
So as far as like where user testing falls into like development, would you say like you build up a mock-up like of what you want, and then do some user testing and then continue from there, like based on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's like the typical waterfall kind of approach to it, where you're kind of just fitting in user testing at various steps. I've been in more agile environments where it's we're just going to design this one feature and then test that this feature works, and then kind of piece the features together based on the user feedback we're getting. User testing your information architecture is kind of even a pre-step as well. Or not a it's necessary work that needs to get done. And having that tested just lays that even better foundation for yourself. So you can feel confident that people are going to be able to navigate and understand all the relationships and labeling that you're using in your site. This probably is a whole nother can of worms, but even before you're developing a product, if you're following like lean methodologies, you really should be user testing your actual like solution product market fit before you really start developing anything with mockups or code. So even at that early stage, getting out in front of 2 or 3 people, just so you're out of your own head and kind of bubble, is a really, really nice way to kind of user test early ideas. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we can get into there. But so I guess in a traditional waterfall sense, I would start, it depends on what slice of the pie you kind of want to bite off first in your development and design process. But typically, yeah, you could do information architecture, then you do some user testing, you do a wireframe, you do some user testing, then a mockup if you want to do that brand user testing, and then a landing page from there. And more code-based prototyping, and then user testing throughout that process.
So ideally, you want to kind of include the user testing in like every kind of step of the way, like from just conceptualization to like building things. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I've been in products where we did it all at the end, right? We kind of internally developed a tool, and we all worked together, and we all were patting each other on the back, like, "Oh, this is great, this is amazing," and then we kind of put it in front of users, and they're like, "Well, we can't use this. We have no idea what's going on." And we had spent like a year developing the code and the product. So if we had brought that user testing from the end to earlier in the process, we might have identified some of those problems and not wasted those 6 to 10 months of development time chasing down the wrong rabbit hole. So when you think of it that way, it becomes an enormous cost and time saver. In that specific example, we ran out of money. That company doesn't exist anymore. And that's like, those are the stakes we're playing with here. So I really encourage everybody to test as early and as often as possible. Let's see here. So validating a product idea, how many people would you use as a rule of thumb for determining whether it's a large enough problem to solve, 50, 100, or a percentage of sample? Ooh, that's a really good question. I don't have a set number. It depends largely on the problem or product I'm currently working on or the idea that we have. If you can get at the beginning kind of 20 people to say like, I would be willing to buy that right now, I would feel really comfortable kind of moving on to a MVP or sort of prototype or even a design prototype phase from there. That's generally my personal threshold. And that can change rapidly depending on the product and the stakeholders involved and what funding situation looks like, if it's bootstrapped or if it's venture backed or angel backed. All those levers can really influence that equation. But for me, that's kind of like, if I can get 20 people that to look at the product or to hear the idea and be like, wow, when are you guys going to finish that? Is it tomorrow? Can I pay you now? Kind of thing. That's a really great rule of thumb for me.
One of Krug's other books, the title "Don't Make Me Think," gives you a simple idea of what it's about. But in that, when going up to these people, how do you get ideas on color and testing? Do you have a suggested amount of like SketchUps that you have on hand? So like, here's 3 that we're thinking about. Which one appeals to you most and like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've got, I mean, that's part of the designers. That's why designers are so important to the process. It's like how do they take problems and then identify solutions and design around them, and colors being a very large part of that final solution. So I've had products where we've worked on one color scheme and one color scheme only. I've had ones where like 3 is the golden rule. We're always going to do 3. And I've had some go crazy where it was a totally new concept and we did like 10 or different design sort of iterations, very, very different ways. So it really comes down to your designer and their bandwidth. If they're doing a ton of projects, it doesn't make sense to ask them to do a ton of different design comps. And I've really haven't found a hard and fast rule about it. I know one's not great. So having more than one is generally nice because then you can kind of present to people and say, at least you can get some difference as a comparison. 3, generally, it's pretty good, especially in the early stages. And more than that, though, you're probably could be spending your time more effectively elsewhere.
What's your favorite part of user experience?
That's a really good question. I really do enjoy user tests because it's such a wonderful reality check on what you're working on and developing. So as an engineer, I spend a lot of time in the code day in, day out, and I think I'm building the greatest thing in the world. And then I show it to 5 people, and 2 of them had a hard time, and then the other 2 couldn't do it, and one person was like, that's kind of on track. And it just that gut check and that reality check is always an eye-opening experience, and you always learn something new that you hadn't have thought of, or you just get a sparkle of a new idea, and you're like, okay, maybe if we tweak these 2 or 3 things. And then watching that progress over time. So like the first one, you might have like 100% of people can't use the interface. And then that percentage declines. So eventually you've got all the people are able to do it. And you've been able to track and measure that progress over time and the success of the interface and how users are interacting. So that for me has always been a very rewarding experience. And I also like getting out of the office sometimes and talking to people and gauging people's reactions to something I've been working on. So I really enjoy that part of the process.
So as far as finding work with UX, like how do you usually come across like jobs? Like how do you across people?
Sure. So I'm a kind of a freelancer consultant right now, and normally I get my foot in the door through development. I can say I can build that for you, and then they say, well, how do you make sure that it's going to be a successful product at the end of the day? And then I go, all right, so we need to do user experience, and that can be. That's just been my personal approach to it. I know folks out there who are only UX consultants. That's becoming more and more of a thing, and they kind of have worked pretty hard on developing a reputation for themselves and do really well through word of mouth and get those deals and contracts. But for me, I kind of work with smaller early stage companies that aren't necessarily thinking about user experience. I'm based out of Austin, Texas, so it's not Silicon Valley, it's not San Francisco, where that's kind of a buzzword and people are familiar with it. So I generally get in the door with saying, like, I can do design work or I can do development work for you. And then they kind of say, like, okay, well, what's like, I've heard of user experience, can you explain it to me? And then the onus is really on me as a practitioner to educate the client about what is user experience, how it can benefit them. I think anytime you can present to them the benefits of user experience, and that's coming down to less time wasted, a higher chance that this product or project is successful, better engagement with users, or I build a lot of internal tools, so better engagement with employees. And when you can present the benefits to them in that way, they get really excited and say, okay, let's go for it, and let's really do the process properly, instead of saying, like, we're just going to hand you some mock-ups and you're just going to make it happen, or we just need you to crank out a design, no research, we're not going to budget for that. And that's happened, and that's the reality of the world at times. But I always try to make the case and at least say, like, have you thought about doing it this way and saving yourself money and time and effort?
How long have you been working as a developer?
Yeah, so I've been working as a developer for probably, I want to say 3.5 years, more or less. And I've been doing designing UX for longer than that.
Did you pick up development in order to kind of help you in UX or help you kind of get elected into companies?
Yeah, so what I did, I came out of school with an econ and banking and finance degree, tried to get into that industry and said, you know what, that's not for me. And I was working at the time with some startups, and I was doing a lot of their accounting, a lot of their business development, and they were having a hard time articulating their product vision to their development teams. And luckily in school, I had done a year of studio arts. And so I learned some Illustrator. And I said, hey, let me try designing for you guys. I'm just kind of going out on a limb saying, let me try and design what you're trying to articulate to these guys so maybe we can communicate better. And that's what kind of started me on this whole journey. So I got really into user interfaces. How do I convey somebody's like requirements and problems and ideas into an interface solution? And in that learning, I really said, oh, it's a user experience. That's the process. That's the way to do that. And I finally was doing that for a little while, and I was tired of handing off the idea to the development team and kind of saying, all right, you guys got it now. I really wanted to know kind of how the sausage was made. So I started learning software engineering on the side. I picked up HTML and CSS first because that kind of was a very nice segue. I learned some JavaScript in the past, so I was kind of, okay, maybe we can throw that in there. And then I was able to land my first job as a front-end engineer, and from there picked up PHP, picked up database management, all that good stuff, writing queries, and now I can say I'm full stack. So that was my personal journey.
I just wanted to thank you because like I've worked on like a bunch of different things, like and like building things for myself. But I think like you kind of shifted my view of like building code, just like because like usually I just like, oh, okay, here's a problem, here's how to fix it, and less about like how will people actually use this. So like I feel like this has really helped me with kind of figuring out where the user fits in and how to market ideas.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear. And yeah, at the end of the day, I started in that mindset too. And as an engineer, especially, you kind of get in the code and you get real bogged down in solving those problems. But always, at the end of the day, someone's going to have to use this product. And if you're not taking their ideas and consideration and mental model into account, they might be unhappy, and therefore all that work and effort that you've worked really hard to accomplish could be wasted. So that's why I always think the user is paramount and comes foremost. And I'm glad that it sounds like you're starting to feel that way too. So that's awesome.
We've got a few more minutes for questions. If anyone else has any additional questions, just give you a couple of minutes to either post them in the group chat or go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. Just give you a couple more minutes. I'm going to take that as a no more questions signal. So thanks a lot, Nick. This is really great. You had given us a lot of great insights today, I think. I really appreciate you taking the time out to share with us. Feel free to give us a chance to hear from you again sometime.
Sure, I'd love to be back. Thank you all for listening and for having me on. It's been a real pleasure and an honor.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, take care and have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good day. Thank you.